everyone. For anyone who was just joining us, so glad to have you here today in this session, Empowering Change Through Coaching, Conversation, and Cultural Care. My name is Dr. Eva Allen, and I'm joined by my colleagues from the West. And again, thank you for your time and being here today. Just real quickly, some housekeeping items. There is a QR code for today's resources just from this session, and Melissa or Catherine are going to drop in the Padlet just as a refresher if you didn't have access to the Padlet for today's session. All the sessions today, I should say. Just to highlight, if you were at the Implementers Forum, this was one of the sessions that was presented. So if you're here for part 2, it'll just solidify your learning on that day, but also we are going to begin right away, and thank you again. So, learning path today, revisiting our why, understanding intent versus impact as coaches. This is really for coaches who are working with teams in your building and maybe even in your district. We're going to talk about patterns of practice and the outcomes of systems, and how we're going to initiate conversations through the Culturally Responsive TFI, or Tiered Fidelity Inventory. A copy of that is also in your Padlet for today's session's materials. Next to last, we're going to talking about coaching with and for cultural care, and we'll go into what cultural care is, and then I follow up with some resources at the end. If there's anything in the chat, Melissa or Catherine, and you need to stop me, please let me know. I have multiple screens going. So again, if there's a question that comes up, feel free to plop it right in the chat, and we'll help answer that for you. Some of you may be very familiar with this quote by Chaim Guinnot. And it really speaks to the importance of how we show up in our day-to-day as educational leaders, teachers, coaches, and our influence on the environment. So just take a moment to read this quote and indicate in the chat something that stood out for you, any words or phrases. I am the decisive element. Yes. We help them become what they are capable of becoming. Yes, this is true for adults as well as students. It is my response. Absolutely. And sometimes it takes a self-awareness and a social awareness to remind us of this. We are human, we make mistakes, but again, just really reflecting and showing ownership. Yes, Justin, thank you for elevating that. It's really, really true. So Jamie, yes, personal approach that creates the climate. We all influence our moods in our families and the people that we come in contact with every day, and how we show up influences that, especially as a coach. So our reach is far and great as a coach. Just grounding ourselves with PaPBS, knowing that our systems, data, and practices should be really grounded in equity. How are we looking at our outcomes to make sure that they are equitable? Are we examining our data? Are we looking at our practices? Because when we think about practices, that's what informs our systems and gets our data and outcomes, right? So we talk a lot about our systems. We need a system in place, and let's look at the data. But how does our practice influence what we're really trying to do? And our patterns in our practice show up through our data and in our systems. So let's talk about our why. Why do you do what you do every day? We are motivated and influenced by our decisions, I should say, are motivated and influenced by every thought that we have, by every feeling, or the vulnerable decision-making points. So it's really important to be aware of what is our why. maybe you want to indicate or share in the chat, what's your why? Why do you show up every day? Why is it so important to be a coach and being mindful of our importance of being? So if you want to share with one another, please feel free. We're going to talk a little bit about the past practices and how we're moving away from exclusionary to equitable. If you could do me a favor, share in the chat, what are some traditional models of school discipline that you can think of? Just a few responses would be great. What are some traditional models of school discipline? ISS, OSS, yes. Suspension, detention, punitive is traditional. Absolutely. So I am working with a bunch of scholars today, and you're exactly right. We are traditionally punitive versus proactive. Those OSS, out of school suspensions, ISS, in school suspensions, and even when it's not exclusionary, sometimes it's shaming. And we talk about how we provide feedback and redirect. The same is true for adults. How do we provide support? Is it exclusionary? Is it welcoming? And then it's also embedded in other systems, right? So we see our school-wide or classroom acknowledgements, such as leveling, that can actually be shaming, those clip up, clip down charts that I know are very difficult to move away from, but we highly encourage you to do so. And then it also can mirror practices within the criminal justice system. I'm not sure if anyone indicated that, but I do think that we're moving towards a more restorative approach. So we know that this is the way that we used to do things, and we are shifting and changing, hopefully in a most proactive way to a more proactive approach. So why is it that we are so focused on centering equity with all that we do? And it's really important to look at the historical data. And this is something that is very difficult to share year after year after year. We see the inequities with students with disabilities and how they are twice as likely to be suspended than their non-disabled peers. And then when we look at nearly 50% of our students with labels with intellectually and emotionally disabled, they spend 60% outside of their school day in isolated settings. Now we are moving towards a more portion model and making sure that they are in the least restrictive environment in general education classroom settings. However, it still happens. This is actually from the 2017-18 civil rights data collection. So these practices are still happening. 70% of our LGBTQ students experience verbal harassment and bullying in school settings. 17% report being assaulted. 57% feel that nothing will be done even though it is reported. When we look at our racial demographic data, African-American male students are suspended or expelled 3 times the rate of their peers and 6 times the rate for Black female students. And we look at disproportionality and exclusionary discipline, it actually begins as early as 3 to 5 years. So those preschool, pre-K students are actually experiencing this from a very early age. And again, some of this data may be very familiar to you, and you've heard it before, but until it really is an outcome that we no longer see, it is important to elevate every time that we come together. It is our why. Students of color have an overrepresentation in emotional support and underrepresentation in gifted and talented courses. So we're likely to seek help in terms of special education. However, we don't recommend students of color for gifted and talented courses. And how do we get there? How do we get those outcomes? And likely it's in educational policies and procedures, right? Especially procedures related to discipline. And then when we look at the social impact, it's evident through the school to prison pipeline. That's that judicial aspect that I mentioned before, the criminal justice system. And policies, again, the practices that systematically streamline students into those juvenile and criminal justice systems. So important to elevate. If you don't have a why, I hope that some of this data that we shared is elevated and brings it to the forefront. Like that quote says, how we show up and how we personalize our interactions and what our why is. This is my why, and I'll share just a little bit about myself. These are pictures of my family, and I always get emotional at this point because it's so important to understand what our motivator is. We have to care in order to really show up in a way that is going to get the outcomes that our students and staff need. So this is my family on the upper left-hand corner. Donovan is in the center. He is adopted. My son in the middle, you see they're doing Braille. That's Braxton. He is actually a sophomore at Robert Morris. Oh my goodness, I'm getting old. And he has a vision disability. So he's my why. My children are biracial. They are my why. They are the statistics that you saw on that screen. My husband, Eric, and his 3 children. Sometimes we've been questioned if he really is the student, my son's father, just because of the misconception of what a child of color or a student of color looks like. My aunt, who is disabled, she had MS and became a quadriplegic. My mom was a lesbian. She passed away, but she was gay. And she is a motivator as to my why. What did she experience in high school? I don't think I was brave enough to have those conversations when she was here, but it's important to know that our parents and grandparents and the people that we serve every day are not immune to the practices and policies that impact them, sometimes in a very harmful way. And then lastly, in the far right-hand corner, that is my son, Cole, and his friend, Hassan. Hassan is a student who is an English language learner, and he came to Pittsburgh from Ukraine, but speaks Russian. So his experience as an English language learner contribute to his experiences in the school setting. So these are my why. Give a name to your why in the chat. Who is your why? Students, Cooper, Logan, Andrew, my sons, my students, the underdogs. I like that, Stacy. My students without parents. Thank you for sharing. Again, students and children. And our coaching really impacts the adults that influence those individuals that you mentioned, your students, your families in the chat. So thank you again for sharing your why. I'm doing a lot of talking, but I promise you there's a fun activity that is coming up, a very enlightening one. We're going to move to intent versus impact. So let's talk about impact. What does impact mean? Your impact says what had happened was, right? The end result. But our intent was I didn't mean to, right? Human beings, we actually don't always intend to have the impact that we do, but it's important to be aware of our impact versus our intent when engaging with students as well as adults when we're coaching individuals. So if somebody wants to unmute, what role does assuming positive intent play in authentic change? So when we're thinking about what we really want to happen versus what does happen, when we assume positive intent, what does that mean? You can unmute or you can put it in the chat.
I think assuming positive intent changes the way we view it, changes our perspective on things. So if we think something was done maliciously, we go negative. But if we go positive intent, it goes that direction and it keeps us on board and connected more.
Yes, thank you, Gina. I appreciate that. Anyone else want to add voice to the question?
It's a mindset change. You are establishing your mindset, which then is a trickle-down effect that can change others then based on the mindset that you have and the intention you go into each day.
Absolutely. It's about your thought process. Thank you for sharing, Justin. I appreciate that. Anyone else? I know Catherine put in the chat relationship building, right? Absolutely. How do we balance assuming positive intent in authentic change with what was intended, right? So when we think about the intention, how often are we going to, I didn't mean to in this setting versus really holding accountability for the responsibility of the people who are being negatively impacted. So when we think about intent, I didn't mean to, when I'm a parent, something happens, I didn't mean to. When do we pass the point of assuming positive intent and really helping people understand what it means to make authentic change? So sometimes intent is irrelevant when our impact is so harmful. So we need the feedback required for change. We want to minimize, if not dismiss the harm, or we don't want to minimize or dismiss the harm that's caused because we didn't mean to, right? How do we start holding one another accountable in a respectful way that is a growth mindset spiraling upward? And when we think about the intent, we know that when students are targeted for their identities, whether it be sexual orientation, gender, immigration status, race, ethnicity, or other identities, there is a harmful impact. Their mental and physical health suffer. There are high rates of suicide, depression, and anxiety, more likely to take risks, suffer stress and depression. Racial ethnic discrimination can cause behavioral problems. It can cause shutting down. We've seen flight, freeze, or appease as a response that can be misinterpreted as disrespect. So we have to look at our intent versus the impact. This information came from the Migration Policy Institute, Hate at School and Teaching Tolerance. And again, this is all on the Padlet through the QR code, which is in the lower right-hand corner on the screen. So all the materials and resources that are connected to this particular presentation are on the QR code, and a copy of the PowerPoint is included as well on today's Padlet from the Coach's Day Playbook. So let's look at the positive impact that adults have in a school setting. When we think about the impact that a teacher has, we know that they are the greatest contributors to student academic outcomes. And when students succeed academically, we know that behaviorally that is also impacted. This comes from Hattie's research and there are multiple pieces of research that support the impact that adults have on children every day. Children with limited protective factors, shifting away from the at-risk label, who have the presence of an influential adult outside of their homes, experience positive outcomes well into adulthood. And I bet if I asked anyone in this room or in this space today, who impacted you when you were in school? You could probably attach a name to somebody who had a positive influence on your life and very vividly recall how they made you feel when you showed up in their classroom or you saw them in the hallway at any given time. And if you want to honor that person, I welcome you to share their name and put that in the chat. Lastly, students who hold high expectations for students and teachers, create positive student relationships, are more likely to have above average impact on student academics. These are all things that you likely know, but really seeing the impact in terms of outcomes is really, really important to revisit and remind ourselves how we show up, when we show up, and why we show up is critical in terms of creating a positive school culture and climate and getting the environment and outcomes that we seek. Looking at specifically the data that surrounds Hattie's research, we know that 0.04, which is the threshold for just a moderate impact, we see that student-teacher relationship, the impact of student-teacher relationship on student growth is actually in the very high area. It's one of the top 11, I think it is number 11, top 11 practices that we use that has the greatest outcomes for students. So you are important and you matter, and how you show up matters. So let's talk a little bit about coaching. We have so much on our plates, especially if you are wearing multiple hats, which likely you are. And sometimes being a coach can feel like this. Balancing. We're trying to swing it back and forth. Go with the flow. Holding on for dear life. Someone's drowning in the water. Someone's holding on to another one and trying to get someone to pick them up. So that's what it can feel like as a coach. We're just swinging and we're trying to hold on, and sometimes we land in the water and sometimes we're holding on for dear life, but know that you have one another. This is actually a tourist site in China where they play a game to see who can stay on the bridge. Try to be like that gentleman in the middle. Just dance your way through. When in doubt, dance out. So let's shift a little bit and talk about our patterns in practice, right? So when we think about our systems and how our systems shaped, and we're looking at our data, it's really how, as a human, we are engaging with those systems and structures that we have in place, and really identifying the patterns that, that keep inequities in place. So to make gains in student learning, teams must identify patterns and respond accordingly. Do we keep the practice? Do we eliminate the practice? Or do we modify the practice? So if you want to share with the group, or you want to unmute yourself, actually, that would be a great idea if you could add voice to it, so I'm not the only one talking. Where do you see patterns of inequities within your organization? And what steps might you take to address the inequities? Feel free to unmute. Where might you see inequities in your organization? Trying to be, we're vulnerable here, so if you don't want to share, I totally understand. If you're not comfortable putting your voice to it, you can put it in the chat. Hi, Jamie.
Good morning. You often see inequities with your students with special needs.
Absolutely. And can you give a concrete example by chance?
Access to resources.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. And
could I piggyback off with what Jamie said? I was thinking something similar, but just like in universal systems that may not be in place, they can potentially also cause inequities because there are no systems in place. And then we want to blame the students.
Right. What is an adult issue versus a child concern, right? Adding voice to what Nicole Waite says in the chat. She said, being an education teacher, I have students with behavior plans that general education teachers continually get upset that these kiddos aren't receiving, quote, consequences or being punished. Yeah, right. Sometimes it's an emotional, teaching is very personal and there are emotions tied to that. So a lot of times when we feel like we've been harmed as an adult, we want to see a punish or a consequence. And sometimes that's human nature, but it's being aware and really pushing people to see the bigger picture and really understand their students better through those relationships. So thank you for those who share discipline and students with disabilities. And someone said, wow, Gina. So give them props to Gina. All right, so this is where you're going to need your paper and pencil, or if you want to jot it down, if you're multitasking on multiple screens. We're going to create a biography by answering questions on the following slides. I'm going to show you 6 different shoes, and you're going to select one shoe and answer the question about the owner. So you're creating a biography based on a shoe. You get to pick whatever shoe you like, and then you're going to describe who owns the shoe. And this is really a fun activity. You can do this with your teams. It's really enlightening. So if everyone has something, let's go on. All right. So you don't have to answer all the questions, but please do your best to answer the first 4 questions. Who owns the shoe? Give them a name, first, middle, last, age, 3 personality traits of the owner. How do other people feel about the owner? Perhaps if you want to go a little bit deeper, what is the owner's marital status? What does the owner look like? What do they do for a living? And an accomplishment. So I will put on some ambiance music for 2 minutes for you to create your biography on who owns the shoe.
She asked me what's my name, I tell her I am Connie. And I said, girl, tell me what's your name. And she tell me that her name is Jamaica. And I said, smile, girl, smile. Smile for me, Jamaica. And I said, smile, girl, smile. Ooh, Lord, smile for me, Jamaica. And never you cry, here am I. Girl, I'm here for you, Jamaica. Dry your eyes, girl, smile. Smile for me, Jamaica. Lord, hey, she have a rich history. A beautiful woman with the sweetest gifts. Beautiful sunrise and an evening kiss of a nice sunset on the evening season. But she tell me, say she tired. Tired of the exploit and the liars. She give them reggae, give them beaches, give them flowers and the ferns. All she got is abuse in return. But I say, don't you worry yourself, mama. Hey, Chronix is here to your help, mama. Ooh, I said,
1 more minute.
yourself, mommy. One thing me, I beg you do for me. And I say, smile, girl, smile. Smile for me, Jamaica. And I said, smile, girl, smile. Hey, smile for me, Jamaica. Never you cry, here am I. Girl, I'm here for you, Jamaica. What must I try? Oh my, that she asked me. And this I want me say, a sweet, sweet Chronix, you figure them, give them. The one drop beat pan a rhythm. Are you give them bob with a different step in? Are you give them bolt, nobody can run left him. Boy, but see ya, them must see things, say you're out of ideas. You give them
How's everyone doing? You okay? You need more time? Can you give me a thumbs up? I can only see a few faces and beautiful faces that they are on this Friday. Look, I see almost got a smile from Justin, almost. Okay, I got a thumbs up. Thank you, Christy. I appreciate it. Rhonda, thank you for the thumbs up. All right, so let me, this is a great album, by the way. It's Chronic, and just really upbeat songs. Love playing it for my students in the classroom when I was there. Okay, great. So we need a brave soul who can share their narrative or their biography with the shoe that they chose. So if you could, anyone can go ahead. Tell us about the owner of the shoe you chose.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, hi Nova.
Okay, so I chose number 5, and the young lady is 7 years old. Her name is Caitlin Francis DeMonico. She is a very insightful, introverted, and happy 7-year-old. Other people describe her as cute, a little bit strange, different, that she has a nice smile. She lives with her mother and father and baby sister. She has light brown hair, which is curly, but certainly unkept. She always wears mixed patterns, layers her clothing, is always walking around the neighborhood and writing or drawing in a little notebook. And the thing that she has accomplished is that she has drawn a picture of everyone on her block.
That was amazing. I don't know about any of you, but I could completely see this child in my mind. Especially the multi-layered, very creative, like this is how I saw her. Awesome job. Thank you for that. Someone else. We'll take.
Hi, I can go, Dr. Eva.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph.
Sure. Her name is Mrs. I Got This. Oh, I'm sorry, I chose number 3. There we
Okay,
go.
thank you. I knew
Yeah.
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
Just a feeling.
It kind of related right into that, didn't it? Her age is she's 50 something. She doesn't really reveal that to many people, but because she doesn't feel it matters. Some 3 of her personality traits are she is generous, outgoing, and respectful to others. People feel about her that she is very strong, but at times unapproachable.
Okay.
She is married and has 3 children who vary in ages from 3, 9, and 16. She is, as far as physical appearance, she's very well kept. She may have business suits, but she is not beyond dressing casually. Let's see. What does she do for a living? She is a professor at a college. And the thing that people may not know about her is that she wrote a book on coaching and academic success at a college level.
Nice. Really nice. I love that. Thank you. All right, one more person. So we have number 5, number 3, someone who did maybe 1, 2, 4, or 6.
All right, I can go.
All right, Justin. Justin, you are on fire today. Thank you.
All right, so I chose shoe number 1.
Okay.
So we have Chase Landon Atherton, is a 21-year-old full-time college student who works part-time to help pay his way through college. He's hardworking, has a relaxed temperament, and is friendly to all he meets. He's in a relationship with his longtime high school girlfriend and has a very relaxed look about him, faded jeans, t-shirt, and a sweatshirt. He's helping to take care of his younger siblings while his mom works 2 jobs to keep a roof over their head and food on the table.
Wow. Anyone know? What was his first name, Justin, again?
Chase Landon.
Does anybody know a Chase out there? Can you relate to Chase? And Miss I Got It? Miss I Got It? Was that her name, Joseph? Yeah. Yeah, great. So we could connect with someone or something, an inanimate object, and really create a complete narrative about that person just based on a shoe, a personality, their job, what they do, their name. And I would bet, again, all of us could visualize the description that Justin, Joseph, and Nova gave us very clearly. This is what we do every day to make sense of the world around us. We try to find and make meaning based on what we see. And we do it about people because it's a natural response. But what about when we form those opinions? Like we were able to identify a gender, personality, profession, right? And just to give you a little clue, I own a pair of these shoes. These images are based on a pair of shoes, which I admittedly have way too many shoes. However, I have all of these. So I wonder if I'm a little bit of some of those descriptions based on what shoe I'm wearing that day. But really, this is just to elevate the fact that we, as human beings, try to make sense of the world. And our practices are shaped by the way we make sense of the world, by our past experiences, our circles of influence. And this is true for the people and individuals that we work with every day. So when we are forming these opinions and have this narrative in our mind of what this person is or is not, how do we interrupt that when our impact is not our intent and our thoughts are really maybe misshaped? It's that self-awareness and social awareness piece that's so critical and really shaping our systems. Again, patterns and practice are shaped by the human beings that interact with them and the decisions that we make. And those decisions are based on our experiences. So shifting away, again, thank you for your participation and thank you to those who have your camera on. I know that we all have a lot going on, but it's great to see some smiles and get some feedback that you're there with me. So thank you for that. So when we talk about systems change, it's about advancing equity through the shifting the conditions that hold the place in problem. Sometimes the problem is held in place by our own decisions that we make on past experience and perception, because every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And we do the best that we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we have to do better. So as a coach, how is it that we're looking at patterns in practice? Because our thoughts become our words become our actions become our habits become our character, and our character is our destiny. So when we coach and support targeted goals through systems, data, and practices, what is it how are we engaging with the fidelity tool? How are we pushing the conversations to be more mindful? And one way is using the culturally responsive TFI to examine the patterns of practice. You have a copy of this in the Padlet, just so you know. And systems change is, again, about advancing and shifting the conditions, sometimes through our thoughts, that hold the pattern or the problem in place. So just to give you a little bit of background, the purpose of developing the culturally responsive TFI was a team effort. And I have some former colleagues from Pittsburgh Public School that are in the space today that really added their voice to developing the culturally responsive TFI. And why was it developed? Well, we saw that there were limitations when we showed up at school to do a TFI walkthrough that really didn't lend itself to the system being identified as operating with fidelity, but our outcomes weren't exactly aligning with what the TFI was saying. So how can we not change the fidelity measurement tool, but how can we change the coaching conversation that we're having with our teams to push them to think a little bit deeply about how we're interacting with our systems, because the TFI captures the fidelity of our systems and practices in place, but are we diving deep enough into our practices that influence our scoring and our outcomes? So that's really the motivation for creating the culturally responsive TFI. And we didn't know and understand it until we were actually in it. When you know better, you do better. So again, it supports the rich conversation. It doesn't change the fidelity. It doesn't change, the tool itself was not changed, but how we utilized it with our teams is what we were really pushing to do. So just to give you some background, we use the TFI, our professional experiences as coach doing those walkthroughs, the crosswalk of TFI with the trauma-informed and culturally responsive enhancements. Full disclosure, we did not dive deep into the trauma piece, but we know that it complements the culturally responsive piece. So again, getting started and getting better. And then we looked at the culturally responsive field guide, and all these are on the screen and also included on the pad that the QR code reflects. And we also looked at, as a district, what other things are in place that we could use to enhance our PBIS systems and our practices? Like, why are we not incorporating the restorative practice piece and talking about it specifically on those items that really connected back to how we discipline our students, or is there progressive discipline? But also we looked at efficacy, equity, and social emotional learning. They're all so connected. It's not another add-on, it's a complement too. So really important that we made those connections to our teams and coaches and teachers to say, hey, we're not adding more to your plate. Let's look at what's on your plate and how we can make it better for you and for your students. The final product is in an Excel spreadsheet as well as a PDF. And then we looked at data, right? So again, data is the starting point, but until we dive deeper into what the data is telling us about our practices, we're going to get the same results. So what data do you collect? Share in the chat if you don't mind. And is it meaningful? Is it used, right? Just having data and not using it, what's the point? What does your data reflect? And is it disaggregated by race or gender? And what are some patterns that you see in the data? Those are all really thoughtful questions that you want to have with yourself and your team. And how do you coach your teams to operate through an equitable mindset? You're welcome to share with one another. Again, learn from one another. I'm only one person in the space of a ton of experts. I don't even know how many people are here. We have 43 people here, and we learn best from one another. So if you have something important to share or something that you're doing, please, by all means, put it out there for everyone to learn from. And I see some things coming in. Swiss absolutely is a data system that you can use. Weekly tickets, yep. How is your incentive system informing who's being acknowledged, when they're being acknowledged? Are we acknowledging adults? Absolutely. TFI, SAS, yes. Student surveys, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, student voice, so critical. Nurse visits, absolutely. Pulling those people that are really seeing the students at their most vulnerable times, thinking about the nurse, thinking about our cafeteria staff, thinking about the custodial staff. Some of our staff members outside of the classroom have such good relationships. Utilize that. Absolutely. Thank you. Student and family surveys, Justin, yes. And then lastly, what does the action plan include? So are you including that in your action planning? So coaching teams, what might a coach or a team want to look for and examine patterns of practice? Is there anything that comes to mind for you? How would you examine patterns of practice? Anyone want to add voice? No, that's okay. So as you're coaching, think about how you're going to identify patterns and practice with your teams, and consider the tools and data sources that you might use to get there. I just want to elevate and pull out a couple of the key items and key areas that we noticed where, for example, the discipline policies, our outcomes were not matching what our systems data was saying. So where's the weakness within the conversations and the coaching and the scoring? And one of the areas that we noticed is 1.6 on the TFI. And what does that look like? Are we really looking at our desperate impact and outcomes? Are we really doing restorative? Or are we just checking a box? Are we teaching pro-social skills? Is it proactive? Are we using authentic data? And then the last column is the data source. So these are the conversations, or this is the area you can capitalize on when you're working with your teams to call out. Tell me more about how you do restorative practice in your space. Tell me more about how you're teaching pro-social skills. Is it proactive? Are you leveling? Are we leveling our knowledge systems? So again, patterns and practice. The other TFI item came through professional development. If you're not getting the outcomes versus the intent, so your impact is not matching your intent, how can you really identify an area of growth? Well, this is one area. As a facilitator or a trainer, you can really capitalize on promoting that self-awareness, social awareness, that activity that we just did, right? Forming opinions, misconceptions, natural, and it's non-threatening, right? You're not trying to call anybody out for not knowing something, but just really elevating that conversation. And as a coach, if you're not comfortable with that, then we have to own what we don't know. Did I freeze? Okay, good. I froze on my end, but I hope I didn't have a strange look on my face. And again, your data sources on this particular item would be your training calendars, professional development calendars. Is there a process to assist and help faculty or teachers who may need a little bit more coaching in the classroom, at the classroom level, about perceptions and misconceptions? And lastly, the other TFI item that really elevated this kind of discrepancy or the data not aligning with what our outcomes were showing was in the feedback and acknowledgement system. In all honesty, when I was in the classroom, I was the clip chart queen. I thought because it wasn't red, yellow, and green that I was doing a great service to my students because it was pink and purple. However, it was how it was utilized that was really causing harm, right? And I based my classroom acknowledgements on that system. So taking a look at things like what's happening at the classroom level, but what also is happening school-wide. Who's participating in the field trip? Who's being excluded from the field trip and why? So those conversations of who's participating in our feedback and acknowledgement systems is really important to talk about when we have school-wide celebrations, including all. And just, I highlighted some of these for you. And again, our data sources to help identify patterns and practice. Looking at the time, just going to briefly touch upon cultural care. Cultural care was a result of the doctoral research that I did at Duquesne University, and it actually is a social emotional approach that can be used in any organization with teachers and actually with students. And it's really focused on recognizing how we show up, what is our social awareness, right? That social emotional learning piece of it. Our social awareness, how are we interacting with students? Am I aware of my own biases? Because we, again, all naturally have them, but are we creating a system or a mindset of check and balances? So we focused on really looking at how teachers form relationships mindfully, intentionally, optimistically with our students, and looking at the multiple identities that we all show up with. So it includes acknowledging and recognizing a person's race, culture, identity, lived experiences, and multiple perspectives with a strength-based approach. And when we don't have that strength-based approach, being honest with ourselves to say, hey, I was wrong, and being comfortable admitting that we make mistakes. What the research showed is that there was a greater self-awareness. The feedback from the staff that they saw not only a shift in their practice and how they engage with students, but also the students themselves. They had a greater rapport. There were things like one particular participant said, I noticed that students are kinder to one another simply because I am intentional of my interactions when giving feedback to the students. Simple thing as holding the door. And then the teacher also reported that they felt a greater sense of efficacy, which is their belief in themselves to actually do the work that needs done. Student to student and social academic behaviors also sort of shift. So this is here for you. We'll leave some time for questions at the end. But again, you can always go back and revisit the PowerPoint for you. What does it look like in practice? We talked about self-efficacy being the belief in ourselves to actually do a job and do it well, having the capacity to reach the goal. And when we have positive school culture and climate, we have collective efficacy, meaning we are a community that believes in ourselves. And it happens through feedback, modeling, practice, and mindset. If you're familiar with Bandura did a lot of self-efficacy studies, but this is something that we do every day, right? Feedback. It could be verbal, nonverbal. Has anyone ever been in a meeting where somebody eye rolls? That's feedback, right? We don't even sometimes aware. I do not have a poker face, so my face tells a story long before words come out of my mouth. Modeling through observations. Kids are watching you. They're seeing how you talk to other students. They're seeing how you talk to one another. Adults are also doing the same thing. We're always looking at social cues on how to engage and through our practice. Are we walking the walk? Are we talking the talk? And then our mindset. Are we keeping in check our perceptions and beliefs? And are we being honest with ourselves? Again, just another slide that really elevates what it looks like in action, because we can talk about theory all day, but if we don't put our theory into action, we're not going anywhere. So how does feedback look like as a coach? We set the tone, just like that quote we started with. Modeling, are we really showing up as we say that we think we are? In our practice, are we helping to create a positive school environment? And how are we communicating our mindset and collaborating? So again, as a coach, this is what it looks like, coaching with cultural care in action. And there are some resources there that are embedded within the table as well. Begin within. We got to start with ourselves. We can't coach someone if we're not ready to coach. It starts with holistic. How are we as an individual? Are we honest with ourselves of how we are as an organization, a group? Really being honest with ourselves of our current state. And things are tough. You know, COVID has been over for a while now, but we're still feeling the impact, and we're still going to feel the impact because we have shifted. We are different, and that's okay. But how do we navigate and move forward in the most healthy way? Everything that is faced, one of my favorite quotes, can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So I'm going to leave you with this. Let me check the time. We have 3 minutes. And I will stay on here. I know you have to go right to your next one, I believe so. Oh no, we have 15 minutes in between. But if you have to leave early, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. And feel free to reach out anytime. I'll have my contact information at the end of this. Give me a thumbs up if you
Jack Welch once said, "Change before you have to." How true that is. Championship leaders understand that in order to remain relevant and competitive, they must foster a culture that embraces change. When you think about the brands that have been around for 100+ years, how they looked in the beginning is much different than how they look now. They changed. The brands they once competed with no longer exist. Why? They didn't change. Grace Hopper once said, "The most dangerous phrase in language is, 'We've always done it this way.' As the leader, you must relentlessly fight this mindset. Don't allow your team to focus on how things used to be, because used to be's don't make honey. Instead, focus on how things are gonna be. Gonna be's make honey. Gonna be's have a clear vision of the future and how they need to grow in order to become that better version of themselves. They understand constant growth requires constant change. Remember what John Maxwell once said, change is inevitable, growth is optional. Close your eyes and visualize what things will look like in 3 years. How will you need to evolve in order to meet that vision and be a front runner in your space when the time comes? What changes do you need to make? Start making those changes now. As the leader, you have the remote. If you don't like the channel you're on, nobody can change it but you. So stand up and change it. And don't be afraid of the naysayers. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, do what you feel is right, for you will be criticized anyways. Trust your instincts. Pursue your vision. Even if no one else sees it, just start the journey. The others will follow. And stay ready. New levels will bring new devils. But the higher you climb, the stronger you'll get. Take pride in being a professional problem solver as you rise. Remind your team that every change you make is an effort to get better. You don't change for the sake of changing. Like Jim Rohn said, life does not get better by chance. It gets better by change. At the core behind every big change is a why, and that why is to get better.